In the darkness of the California nights, a shadow moves silently, leaving behind a trail of horror and death. His name? Richard Ramirez, a man who would come to be known as the Night Stalker. How did one man bring an entire state to its knees, paralyzed with fear? What twisted path led him to become one of the most feared serial killers in American history? And what drove him to commit such unspeakable acts? The 1980s in America was a time of cultural revolution, but in California, a new kind of terror was born. Richard Ramirez's killing spree sent shockwaves through the state, creating a nightmare that seemed to have no end. Over a period of 2 years, he committed a series of brutal murders that would forever mark him as one of the most notorious figures in criminal history. To truly understand the horror he unleashed, we need to delve into his life, uncovering the roots of his evil and the methods that made him the Night Stalker. Born on February 29, 1960, in El Paso, Texas, Richard Ramirez grew up in a household fraught with difficulties. The youngest of 5 children, he was exposed to violence and abuse from an early age. His father, Julian Ramirez, was a strict disciplinarian who often took out his frustrations on his family. His mother, Mercedes, worked long hours in a boot factory, leaving young Richard to navigate a home filled with tension and aggression. But it wasn't just the home environment that influenced young Richard. His older cousin, Miguel, a Vietnam War veteran, had a particularly dark influence on him. Miguel would regale Richard with horrific stories of torture and murder, even showing him photographs of the atrocities he had committed in Vietnam. These tales, coupled with Miguel's own violent behavior, planted the seeds of brutality in Richard's mind. Miguel even demonstrated his capacity for violence by murdering his wife in front of Richard, an event that would leave a lasting scar on the impressionable teenager. As a teenager, Ramirez began to show signs of deep psychological disturbance. He started experimenting with drugs, dropping out of school, and engaging in petty crimes. But it wasn't just the usual teenage rebellion. Richard was spiraling down a dark path, one that would eventually lead him to become the Night Stalker. His interest in Satanism, spurred by Miguel's influence, began to grow, further warping his sense of morality. This was not just a troubled youth, it was a young man on the brink of becoming something far more dangerous. Richard Ramirez's reign of terror began on June 28, 1984, when he brutally murdered 79-year-old Jenny Vincow in her Los Angeles apartment. This was the first of many killings that followed a chilling pattern. Ramirez broke into homes late at night, attacking his victims in their sleep. He didn't discriminate. Men, women, children, the elderly, all were targets of his savage violence. Ramirez's methods were horrifyingly consistent. He would enter homes through unlocked windows or doors, armed with a gun, a knife, or whatever weapon he could find. Once inside, he would attack without mercy, leaving his victims either dead or gravely injured. What made his crimes even more terrifying was his randomness. There was no apparent motive or pattern, making him almost impossible to predict. Ramirez would often prolong the suffering of his victims, toying with them before delivering the final blow. His signature was his ability to evade capture, moving through the night like a phantom, striking terror into the hearts of all who heard of his deeds. As the body count grew, so did the fear. The media dubbed him the Night Stalker, a name that perfectly captured the dread he instilled in the residents of California. Ramirez seemed to thrive on the fear he created, often leaving behind satanic symbols at his crime scenes, as if to taunt the authorities and terrorize the public even further. He reveled in the chaos he caused, seeing himself as a servant of Satan, bringing death and destruction to those he deemed deserving. But what drove Ramirez to such extremes? Was it the early trauma, the drugs, or his obsession with Satanism? Perhaps it was all these factors, intertwined in a mind that was as broken as it was dangerous. By the summer of 1985, California was in a state of panic. People were afraid to leave their windows open at night, and the once peaceful suburbs of Los Angeles became places of dread. The fear was palpable. Everyone was on edge, wondering if they would be the next victim of the elusive Night Stalker. Gun sales soared, and neighborhoods organized watch groups, desperate to protect themselves from the invisible threat. Law enforcement agencies were under immense pressure to capture Ramirez. The randomness of his attacks made him a particularly difficult predator to catch. However, the police began to piece together crucial evidence. Ramirez's fondness for leaving behind satanic symbols, combined with his preference for a certain type of shoe, an Avia sneaker, helped narrow down the search. Despite their efforts, Ramirez remained one step ahead. He had an uncanny ability to blend into the background, disappearing into the night as quickly as he had appeared. But the police were closing in, using every resource at their disposal, from forensic evidence to psychological profiling, in their desperate bid to stop him before he could kill again. The media played a significant role in amplifying the terror. Every new report of a murder attributed to the Night Stalker sent waves of fear throughout the state. But the increased coverage also brought Ramirez closer to capture. With every broadcast, the public became more vigilant, and it was only a matter of time before someone recognized the face of the killer. The authorities knew they had to act fast. The pressure was mounting, and the public demanded justice. But could they catch the Night Stalker before he struck again? The clock was ticking, and Ramirez was still out there, waiting for his next opportunity to kill. On August 30th, 1985, Ramirez's reign of terror came to an end. A routine traffic stop in East Los Angeles led to his identification, but it was the public who ultimately captured him. Recognized by a group of residents, Ramirez was chased down and beaten before the police arrived. The nightmare was finally over, but the fear he had instilled would linger for years. His capture was almost anticlimactic, given the terror he had caused. The man who had eluded the police for so long was finally in custody, thanks to the vigilance of ordinary citizens who had had enough of living in fear. Ramirez's trial was one of the most sensational in American history. Held in 1989, it was marked by bizarre courtroom behavior, including Ramirez flashing satanic symbols and taunting the jury. Despite his attempts to intimidate, the evidence against him was overwhelming. On September 20th, 1989, Richard Ramirez was convicted of 13 counts of murder, 5 counts of attempted murder, 11 counts of sexual assault, and 14 counts of burglary. He was sentenced to death, a fate he would meet in a California prison nearly 3 decades later. "Death is just a normal thing. See you at Disneyland," Ramirez said after being sentenced to death. The trial revealed the full extent of Ramirez's brutality, shocking even those who had followed the case closely. His lack of remorse, combined with his overt displays of allegiance to Satan, only served to deepen the public's revulsion. This was a man who had fully embraced his role as a harbinger of death, and now he would face the consequences. The conviction brought a sense of closure to many, but the psychological scars left by Ramirez were deep. He had terrorized an entire state, and the memory of his crimes would haunt California for years to come. For those who had lived through the Night Stalker's reign of terror, his imprisonment was a relief, but it also served as a reminder of the fragility of safety and the darkness that can lurk in even the most unsuspecting places. His story also raises important questions about how such evil can be cultivated. Was Richard Ramirez born a monster, or was he made into one by the circumstances of his life? The truth, perhaps, lies somewhere in between, a tragic combination of nature and nurture, resulting in a man who saw himself as an agent of chaos. If you found this deep dive into one of America's most notorious criminals engaging, don't forget to like this video, share it with others who might be interested, and subscribe to our channel for more stories that explore the darker side of history. Stay vigilant and always be aware of the shadows that lurk in the night.